So I've read some about mental health experts who think that there are various causes, various things that make Amish people susceptible to sexual abuse. Is that okay to talk about?
Absolutely. We would love
Okay,
to
because I
talk
don't
about
want to,
that.
I don't want to push you or make you uncomfortable.
No, no,
Some of the things I've read are that there's a lack of education about anatomy and about sex. And
absolutely.
there's a practice in the church to forgive and forget, where you really pretend like it didn't happen anymore. And also a tendency to view the victim as a participant in sin. And in that case, then an unrepentant participant in the sin. So these things kind of come together as a perfect storm and create a lot of vulnerability. Do you agree with the assessment of the mental health experts, or maybe there's some things you'd like to add to it or take away from it? I don't know.
No, all of those things happened to me. So that's definitely, um, I'm happy that somebody's saying that, because I think it is, um, it's a very, very, especially, and I guess that's why I brought up the Amish, the sports and trooper Amish that we were in. We are so extremely sheltered that there's even more, I believe, more sexual abuse happening, and then because of being even more sheltered than maybe the ones that where you knew where they could run around and the young folks. Um, so it's extremely, yeah, unfortunate that people weren't talking about it. Now there is a big movement going on where people are talking about it a lot more, and I am so glad to hear that. Like you guys, that's why we want to help and do interviews to help educate the lack of education in the Amish. There is no sex education at all whatsoever. Um, I say at about 9 years old, one day I was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm bleeding." And I didn't know what it was. I was like, I didn't know if I was know if I was sick or dying. I didn't feel that good, but I didn't know. And finally went and asked my mom, and she's like, "Oh, this is what happens to girls. This is your period." I mean, I had nothing before that, knew absolutely nothing. And she for sure didn't even tell me anything that has to do with babies eventually, and things like that. um but it was just something. Then you don't talk about it. I'm not supposed to talk to any of the other siblings. I wasn't even supposed to tell my sister that now I have this monthly thing that comes. But I shouldn't tell her until she gets hers. But I believe I talked to her about it. I'm not positive, but I think I did talk to her about it, so it maybe wasn't quite as a shock to her. But it's just all these different things. If we would just know, if the kids knew a little bit more. And I think that's unfortunately why sexual abuse is rampant, and then incest is terrible. I mean, it's just a rampant thing. But the kid, nobody really talks about it. Yes, it's not, I mean, just think about it. As teenagers, if you're exploring, like, you don't know anything, you're just trying to figure it out on your own. And I think if they were just to come out and say, this is what they do in schools. My kids get sex education in fifth grade, I think they start. Just tell them about things, and then they wouldn't go out and maybe explore. And then going back to yes, the victim is usually, I mean, in my case, I was a woman or a girl, and it's always our fault. I did something to entice the rapes. My clothes were too tight, or I acted too provocative. You know what I mean? I did something to cause a 28-year-old married man to rape me. That's the thing. I caused him to sin, and yes, he had then went to church and confessed. And he got 6 weeks of punishment, shunning. And I was told to never talk about it, never talk about it again. It was my fault. He now did his punishment. We are never to talk about it. And I didn't talk about it for almost 30 years. I mean, you think how much control they have over you. I mean, it's just mind boggling sometimes when I think that it took me that long, but it just did.
Sure.
I can add a little bit to the whole period thing. I actually used to have nightmares and dreams that I was peeing blood, and I'd wake up and or I would in my dreams, I would wake up and my underwear was soaked in blood. And it was very scary for me until one day my mom told me about this whole period thing. And then I'm like, oh, well, maybe that was why I was having the dreams. I never had the dreams again. It was really weird that I would dream about having a period before I ever had one. And it was just, I don't know. I think it was God's way of telling me and preparing me. And if it happened, then maybe I should tell mom. But before that, I just dreamt about it. But yeah, same as Lizzie, never talked about babies, where they came from. Just while all of a sudden one day there was a child, and we didn't really notice the whole pregnancy thing, especially with our mother, because her belly grew, slowly. So we didn't really notice anything. I don't remember ever noticing my mom being pregnant. Never talked about it, nothing like that. I mean, later on, I think we caught on, and then it was kind of one of those he things, It's like we can talk about it. So we'd go behind the door and giggle because nobody told us what was going on. We knew, like, eventually there's a baby. I remember Liz somehow found out that it takes 9 months.
Yes,
for a baby to be born. And I always, like, when I found out that that's like the word called pregnant, I thought that was like a disgraceful word and a very horrible word that you do not say, like an awful, like, swear word. You don't say that because you don't talk about it. So that's how we found out about pregnancy. I know she's still giggling because it was when you don't know these things, and when you're taught it's nothing you talk about, and all of a sudden it's like they have so many babies. That's what I don't understand. I do not understand how we don't talk about it, because there's babies popping out every year for 15, 16 years straight. How do you not talk about it? I don't know. So I think that there's a lot of little, like, he's and gossips happening, but and we just have to come up with our own theories and assumptions of how this happens, because they don't tell us.
Well, living on a farm, you don't see the animals and make a connection, or perhaps women aren't around the animals. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. Us women were around the animals, but like at a certain time, like my grandparents had a bull for the cows, and they had a stud horse. At certain times, I remember we were like, us women were not allowed around the barn at this certain time. So us women were, that was like, grandma would say that's, like, I don't know exactly. She'd just say, you cannot go out there. That's none of our women, us women can't know about that business. Like, I knew something was going on. Obviously, I was even more curious then. But so she did, kind of, and I don't know that every Amish family, but our grandma was really wanted to shelter us from the animal thing. And I think that from what I've learned and studied on the sexual abuse, like in the last couple of years, is that I think that's why, like, the boys know more about it. And that's unfortunately why sometimes they are, raping their sisters, or sometimes, unfortunately, I don't know if any women, but boys, I don't know what you call that, but they do stuff to animals.
Yes.
Okay. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. And like, I never heard of I don't know. I'm just saying it always seems to be the boys. And then sometimes those are the ones that I've heard that do incest, or, you know what I mean? It just seems like they've learned it from animals. I don't know how else to explain it, I guess. But they need education. I mean, it's just, yeah. And I think the 9 months thing, I think that came from a Danielle Steele book. So, I don't know. So.
Well, I read about a game. Actually, all of the occasions I read about were in Indiana, so it may really have nothing to do with your community in Minnesota. A game boys sometimes play in adolescence called Cow and Bull. Does this ring a bell?
Well, I've heard of little kids in our area that would play cow and calf. cow and calf. But
Yeah, I think that would be different.
I think, yeah, I would
Cow and
think
bull.
you're going to like where this turns into a sexual game, right?
Oh,
That's what they call it. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
No.
it was what I read about it, and I haven't talked to anyone who had any direct experience with this, but it's a game and it's a simulation, but then sometimes it turns not simulation and it's actually an act of violence. But no one is supposed to be playing this game, so everyone is guilty going in. So it's sort of, there's not a resolution to it because the victim was playing a game he wasn't supposed to be playing. And there's not really a distinction between a game that's not allowed and an act of violence, which is what it at times turns into. But I was very surprised to read that there are cases like in the early 2000s, 80-year-old men remember playing this as children. So it goes back a long way, but this was Indiana. It may have nothing to do with your community.
well, and are you talking about, just so we're clear, you're talking about just boys playing this game or
Yes.
boys and girls? Okay, just boys.
Just
Okay.
boys.
Just boys. Okay.
But you learn behaviors.
I guess it doesn't shock me because I know that this abuse has been going on for generation after generation, but I just don't know. Well, I'll just say when I was growing up, I was never aware of anything like that from boys to boys. The abuse always was between my uncle and me, so, but I found out now since that there is some. So I'm expecting it did happen. I just wasn't aware of it.
Sure.
Rachel, wouldn't you agree?
I have never heard of the Indiana, like I didn't know that was a game. I guess I thought you were going to say this is one of the ways that they talk their sister into doing stuff, because that's kind of usually where these stories lead. We're playing some kind of hiding game, or we're playing some kind of secret touching game, stuff like that. But okay. I've never heard of the cow and, you said cow and bull?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just read about it. It may be very unusual. I don't know. That's why I was asking you. You could have said, "Oh, yes, everybody knows that's where they are." I wouldn't know.
No.
But are there some things that you would want a counselor to know if an Amish person were walking in their office? Some things that you would think, you really should know about this, or things that just wouldn't be obvious to us.
Absolutely. I would say they need to know the lack of knowledge that we had growing up. Like there's a lot of things, people still to this day come to me like, oh yeah, remember this TV show back in the day? I'm like, no, sorry, I don't. They're like, well, where did you grow up? And so there's a huge chunk of like, let's just say like TV shows or just the common knowledge that we should know that we don't. I remember leaving when I was 16 and a half years old. And I remember, I don't know, maybe 6 months or to a year into it, I realized I felt like I was a 4-year-old. I had so much to, I don't know why I say 4-year-old, but I had so much to learn, maybe a 4th grader, and catch up with the world that really kind of shocked and stunned me for a while, and I did not, actively participate in like conversations, when there's a lot of people around, like conversations they were having. I really watched myself because they targeted me very quickly. Because a long time I wanted out. So I had to be careful what I said, because then they would pick me out right away. Like I was the different one, like, oh, I don't necessarily remember anybody ever calling me stupid, but just maybe slow and she doesn't know. And I didn't like that.